I stood there for a moment longer, just outside the front door, stunned, my hands trembling. My mother, the woman who had once kissed my scraped knees and tucked me into bed at night, had just kicked me out like I was a stray animal. I could still hear her voice, shrill and furious, echoing from inside the house. I didn't know what I had done wrong. I had sacrificed everything, my emergency savings, my peace of mind to save this roof over their heads. As I turned away and walked to my car, my chest felt tight, as if something heavy had collapsed inside me. The neighborhood, so familiar, now seemed foreign. Neighbors pretended not to see. I drove aimlessly for hours. I couldn't go home. Technically, I had no home now. Eventually, I ended up in the parking lot of a faded motel on the outskirts of town. The room smelled of mildew and sadness, but at least it had four walls that didn't hate me. Lying in the lumpy bed that night, I kept replaying everything in my mind. My father hadn't even come out to stop her. He hadn't said a word. Was he angry too? Did they think I had done it to humiliate them? I called my father once the next day, just to hear his voice. The call rang and rang before going to voicemail. No callback. For 2 weeks, there was nothing. No word from them. I told myself they needed time to cool down. That maybe they were embarrassed. But deep down, I knew better. It wasn't until the 3rd week that my father finally called. His voice sounded hesitant, almost confused. "Anna," he said, "why did you stop paying the mortgage? We just got a letter from the bank." I stared at my phone, heart pounding. He really didn't know. I inhaled slowly, steadying myself. If they wanted to know why everything was crumbling around them, I was ready to tell them. And this time, I wouldn't hold anything back. The silence on the line stretched long after my father's question. I heard his shallow breathing, the faint scratch of a chair against tile as if he was pacing. "Dad," I said carefully, "I paid the mortgage. I covered everything that was overdue, almost $30,000. He didn't respond immediately. Then, cautiously, he asked, "When?" I swallowed hard. 3 days before Mom threw me out. There was a pause, longer, heavier. "I don't understand," he muttered. "Your mother said. She said you refused to help." A cold, sharp wave rushed through me. I tightened my grip on the phone. "No, Dad. I saved the house. I have the receipts. I sent them to her email. I left copies on the kitchen counter." More silence. Then a low, broken whisper. "Anna? Are you sure?" I almost laughed, but it came out as a hollow breath. "You really think I'd lie about something like that?" My father didn't answer. I realized with a pang that he didn't know what to think, because he hadn't been told anything. My mother had built a story without me in it. "I'm coming over," he said suddenly, voice tight. I almost said no. I wanted to slam the door on all of it. But something stronger pulled at me. Curiosity. Or maybe closure. "Fine," I said flatly. "I'll meet you at the diner by the highway. I'm not setting foot back in that house." It was raining by the time I pulled into the cracked asphalt lot. Inside, the diner was nearly empty. I spotted my father immediately, hunched, looking smaller than I remembered. His hair had thinned, his hands fidgeted around a chipped coffee cup. When he looked up and saw me, there was no anger in his eyes, only confusion. I slid into the booth opposite him. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Finally, I pulled out the printed receipts and laid them on the table. He picked them up with trembling fingers, scanning each page slowly. His lips moved silently as he read. At last, he set the papers down and looked at me. His face was pale. "She never told me," he whispered. "Anna, I didn't know. I swear." A lump rose in my throat. I nodded stiffly. "She said you turned your back on us, that you called us ungrateful and selfish." He swallowed hard. "She said you wanted to let the bank take the house." I flinched. It was worse than I thought. "So why?" he asked brokenly. "Why would she say that? Why would she—" He trailed off, his voice cracking. I stared at him, weighing my words. I could see the storm gathering behind his eyes. He was starting to suspect the truth, because Mom didn't want me to have any hold over them, not after what she had done. "Dad," I said quietly. "There are things you don't know. About the mortgage, about other things." His gaze sharpened. "What things?" I hesitated. If I said it now, there would be no turning back, no repairing the image he had of the woman he'd shared a life with. But the truth deserved the light, no matter how ugly it was. I leaned in closer, lowering my voice. "She took out another loan against the house," I said. "Without telling you. Without telling me. That's why the payments got so high." He stared at me like I had slapped him. "She what?" I nodded grimly. "And she didn't use it for the house." He sank back against the booth, his face crumpling. There it was, the first real crack. And it was only the beginning. My father sat across from me, staring blankly at the cracked tabletop. His hands, once so steady when I was a child, now trembled against the mug of cold coffee. "How much did she borrow?" he finally whispered. "Another 60,000, I said quietly. He flinched as if I had slapped him. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. "And that's not all, Dad," I added, forcing myself to continue. "She didn't use it for the house, not a cent." I watched as his face paled further, the last of his strength leaking away like air from a punctured tire. "She told me everything the night she threw me out," I said. "I didn't understand it then. I thought maybe she was angry, scared. But now I see it clearly." "What did she do, Anna?" His voice was barely audible. I took a breath so deep it hurt. "She invested it in a friend's business. Some fast-talking guy named Victor Hayes." I almost choked on the name. "She thought it would double, maybe triple, and that she'd pay everything back before anyone noticed." His face sagged under the weight of the revelation. "And it failed," I continued. "She lost everything, Dad, all of it, and she blamed me because I found out." He leaned forward, burying his face in his hands. The sound of his quiet sobs tore into me. I had never seen my father cry before, not when he lost his job, not when his brother died. Never. And now, sitting in a greasy booth under the flickering diner lights, it felt like watching a great ship sink in slow motion. "She ruined us," he croaked. I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. He didn't pull away. "I tried to fix it, Dad. I tried to save what I could, but I can't do it alone." He nodded weakly, like a man trying to hold on to whatever pieces of his life were left. "I need to know one thing," I said gently. "Did you co-sign any papers? Anything that could make you responsible for that second mortgage?" He shook his head slowly. "No, she always said she handled the bills. I trusted her." I closed my eyes for a moment, feeling both relief and fresh sorrow. "At least there's that," I murmured. We sat in silence until the waitress came by, dropping the check with a sympathetic smile. I caught our reflection in the diner window, two broken people clinging to the fragments of a life that wasn't what we thought it was. As we stepped outside into the cold rain, my father hesitated. "What do we do now?" he asked, his voice hollow. I met his gaze steadily. "We confront her, together, tomorrow." He nodded, a flicker of old resolve in his eyes. Tomorrow, everything would come crashing down. The next morning, I sat in my car outside their house, heart hammering so loudly it felt like it shook the steering wheel. The sky hung low and gray, a perfect mirror to the storm inside me. Dad pulled up minutes later, his old truck rattling as he parked beside me. He didn't get out right away. He just sat there, staring at the house like it was a place he no longer recognized. Finally, he opened his door, moving like a man walking to his own execution. We climbed the steps together. I could hear the television blaring through the thin walls, some mindless talk show laughter spilling out into the misty morning. Dad didn't bother knocking. He pushed the door open and walked in. Mom was sitting in her recliner, a coffee cup in one hand, remote in the other. When she saw us, her mouth curled into a frown. "What's this?" she said sharply. Dad didn't answer. He simply crossed the room and turned off the television. The sudden silence was deafening. I stayed close to the door, arms folded tightly across my chest. "Where's the money, Linda?" he asked, his voice eerily calm. She blinked at him. "What money?" "The $60,000 you borrowed behind my back." The 30,000 Anna paid to save this house. Where is it?" The color drained from her face in an instant. She set her coffee down carefully, almost robotically. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said. Dad shook his head slowly. "Don't lie. Not now." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Mom's face twisted into something bitter, something ugly I barely recognized. "What does it matter?" she snapped. "You weren't doing anything about it. You're too weak. Someone had to save this family." "By stealing from us?" I said, stepping forward. Her eyes flickered to me, not with shame, but with cold fury. "You always thought you were better than us, Anna," she said, voice low and poisonous, "throwing your money around, making us feel small." My throat tightened. "I didn't want you to feel small. I wanted to help." "You wanted control," she spat. "You wanted to hold it over us forever." Dad took a step back, as if physically recoiling from her words. "That's not true," he said, his voice breaking. Mom stood up, her fists clenched at her sides. "I did what I had to do," she cried. "Victor promised it would work. He promised." Her voice cracked. Dad's face crumpled. "And when it didn't, you blamed Anna. You threw her out." Mom glared at him, breathing hard. Then, with a sharp motion, she grabbed her purse from the side table and pulled out a crumpled envelope. She threw it at Dad's feet. "That's what's left," she said. "You want it? Take it." Dad bent down slowly and picked up the envelope. He opened it. Inside were a few crumpled bills, no more than a few $100s. He looked up at her, and for the first time in my life, I saw real hatred in his eyes. Without a word, he turned and walked toward the door. I followed, but at the threshold, I paused and looked back. Mom was standing alone in the middle of the living room, her chest heaving, her eyes wild. She looked smaller somehow, pathetic. And yet, part of me still hurt for her. Without a word, I stepped outside, letting the door swing shut behind me. The confrontation was over, but the war was just beginning. We sat in the truck for a long time without speaking. The rain pelted the windshield in heavy sheets, blurring the world outside. My father gripped the steering wheel, white-knuckled, his gaze fixed on something far away. Finally he spoke, his voice low and raw. "She's not the woman I married." I stared down at my hands, feeling the ache deep in my bones. "We can't save her," I said quietly. "Not from this. Not from herself." He nodded slowly, but I saw the tears he blinked back. "We have to talk about the house," I added. "And the debt." He leaned back, rubbing his forehead. "I don't even know where to start." I pulled out a folded sheet of paper from my coat pocket, a list I'd made after too many sleepless nights in that motel. "There are options," I said, handing it to him. "We can sell the house, pay off whatever we can, or we can let it go to foreclosure and cut our losses." He stared at the paper without really seeing it. "And Mom?" he asked hoarsely. I swallowed the lump in my throat. She made her choices. We drove back to the motel, and Dad checked into a room next to mine. It was a depressing little place, but somehow, having him there made it more bearable. That night, we sat side by side on the edge of his bed, eating takeout burgers and talking through everything. Dad confessed things I never knew. About how isolated Mom had made him over the years. About how she handled all the money, kept the bills hidden, told him not to worry. "I thought it was love," he said bitterly. "I thought she was protecting me." I reached over and squeezed his hand. "You weren't stupid," I said. "You trusted her. That's not a weakness." He gave a broken laugh. "Feels like it." For the first time, I realized how much he had been a prisoner too, trapped in a life where trust had been weaponized against him. We spent hours reviewing paperwork, calling banks, speaking with a lawyer I'd found online. The lawyer, a tired-sounding man named Mr. Carlton, was blunt. The house was underwater. Selling it would barely cover the combined debt, and foreclosure would destroy both my parents' credit for years. Dad sat back, exhausted. "Maybe we just let it go," he said. I hesitated. "What about Mom? Where will she go?" He shrugged miserably. "She made her bed." There was no triumph in his voice, only sorrow. We agreed to meet again in 2 days to start the process. But that night, As I lay awake staring at the stained ceiling, I couldn't shake a gnawing feeling. Mom wasn't the type to go down quietly, and I was right. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a new message, from an unknown number. When I opened it, my stomach dropped. It was from Victor Hayes, and he wasn't alone. The text was short and chilling. "We need to talk. Meet me. It's about your mother." No signature, no details, but the number was listed under Victor Hayes' name when I searched it online. My fingers hovered over the phone, heart hammering. Every instinct screamed that this was a bad idea. I showed the message to Dad over a greasy motel breakfast. He looked at me with a mixture of fear and something harder. Resolve. "Don't go alone," he said. "I wasn't planning to," I replied. Against my better judgment, I texted Victor back with a time and place. A crowded cafe near the highway, in broad daylight. No privacy, no danger. At least, that's what I told myself. Dad insisted on sitting 2 tables away, pretending to read a newspaper. Victor arrived exactly on time. He was younger than I expected, maybe mid-40s, with slicked-back hair and a cheap leather jacket. He moved like he owned the room, like a man who thought charm could patch over everything. He slid into the booth across from me, flashing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Anna," he said smoothly, "you look just like your mother described." I stiffened. "Get to the point." His smile widened, but there was a sharpness underneath now. "Your mother and I had an arrangement. She borrowed from me, I borrowed from her. It was mutually beneficial, until she decided to cut me loose." I frowned. "She invested in your scam. You lost everything." He chuckled, low and humorless. "Not quite. Some of us know how to cover our tracks." I stared at him, cold fury rising in my chest. "What do you want?" He leaned in, dropping the fake charm. "She owes me," he said flatly. "And by extension, now you do." I almost laughed out loud. "You're out of your mind." Victor's smile dropped completely. "You think you can just walk away from this?" "She promised me more than money. She promised access." The blood drained from my face. "What kind of access?" He shrugged casually. "Let's just say your mother was desperate enough to offer up anything, including family assets, including future inheritances." My hands curled into fists under the table. "There's nothing left," I said coldly. "You drained her dry." He tilted his head, studying me like a puzzle he was trying to solve. "Maybe," he said, "but maybe not. Maybe you have more to lose than you realize." He slid a crumpled envelope across the table. Inside was a copy of a forged promissory note, my mother's shaky signature at the bottom, listing my father's name too. If Victor took this to court, it would drag us all into a nightmare. I shoved the envelope back at him. "You have nothing," I said, rising from the booth. He didn't stop me, just sat there smiling that shark smile as I walked out, heart pounding. Dad followed me out seconds later. In the parking lot, I turned to him, breathless. "We need a real lawyer," I said. "Now." He nodded grimly. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. The next morning, I sat across from Dad in a sterile law office, trying to hide how much my hands were shaking. Mr. Barrett, the lawyer we found, was an older man with steel-gray hair and a sharp, no-nonsense voice. His office was crammed with case files and framed diplomas, but what mattered to me was the calm authority he carried. He flipped through the documents I had shoved into a folder, copies of the mortgage papers, the second loan agreement, and now, Victor's forged promissory note. After a long silence, he leaned back and laced his fingers together. "This is bad," he said bluntly, "but not hopeless." Dad exhaled shakily beside me. Barrett tapped the fake promissory note. "This document is amateur work. It won't hold up under forensic scrutiny, but Victor's goal isn't necessarily to win in court. It's to scare you into paying." "So it's blackmail," I said flatly. "In so many words, yes," Barrett said. He pulled out a legal pad and began scribbling notes. "First step, no direct contact with him. Block his number. If he approaches you again, you call the police." Dad shifted uncomfortably. "And the house?" Barrett sighed. "You're better off letting it go. Short sale if possible. Foreclosure if not. Right now, your priority is protecting yourselves legally." I nodded slowly, the weight of it settling over me. "And my mother?" I asked. Barrett's mouth tightened into a thin line. "If she willingly signed documents tying family assets to Victor, she could be liable. You could pursue civil action, but honestly, it would be expensive, ugly, and unlikely to recover much." I felt my stomach twist. I wasn't sure I had the strength for another battle. He saw the look on my face and softened slightly. "Sometimes," he said, "the smartest thing you can do is walk away from the fire and let it burn itself out." Dad nodded heavily. "We've lost enough." We left the office feeling both lighter and heavier at the same time. In the parking lot, Dad turned to me. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice thick. "I should have seen what was happening. I should have protected you." Tears burned behind my eyes. I reached out and gripped his hand. "We protect each other now," I said. The next few days were a blur. Paperwork, calls, meetings. We started the process of surrendering the house to the bank. We cut off all ties with Mom. We filed a preliminary police report about Victor's harassment just in case. For the first time in weeks, I began to feel a small sense of control returning. But peace didn't come easily. One evening, as Dad and I sat sharing a sad takeout meal, he looked up at me, his face drawn. "She called me today," he said quietly. I froze, chopsticks halfway to my mouth. "Linda," he added unnecessarily. "Your mother." "What did she want?" I whispered. He looked down at his hands. She said she was sorry." I stared at him, waiting. "And?" I prompted. He gave a hollow laugh. "And then she asked if we could give her money, just a little, to get back on her feet." I set my food down, appetite gone. He met my eyes, and I saw the deep hurt there, but also something new. Steel. "I told her no," he said. My throat tightened. "We're done saving people who don't want to be saved," he said. And for the first time in a long, long while, I believed him. In the days that followed, life moved in slow, aching steps. The house, once full of memories and noise, was stripped of anything that mattered. We salvaged a few old photo albums, some tools, a handful of keepsakes, but most of it we left behind. It wasn't just about practicality. It was about shedding the past, letting it rot where it belonged. Dad moved into a small apartment not far from my motel. The place was modest, one bedroom, a tiny kitchen, but it was his. For the first time in years, he had control over his own life. I found a slightly better motel room across town, closer to work. It wasn't much, but the walls felt lighter somehow, less haunted. One evening, as I helped Dad assemble a second-hand bookshelf, he said quietly, "You know, I never realized how much of my life was tied to that house." I handed him a screwdriver. "It wasn't the house, Dad. It was her." He nodded, eyes shadowed. "I stayed because I thought loyalty meant staying even when it hurt," he admitted. My throat tightened. Me too. It was a hard truth to face, that love, loyalty, and sacrifice weren't always enough to fix a sinking ship. Some ships deserve to sink. On a rainy Thursday, we met with Mr. Barrett again to finalize the paperwork. The bank had agreed to a short sale, sparing us the worst of the financial damage. It wasn't a victory, but it was a reprieve. Victor never contacted us again. Whether it was the police report, the lawyer's warning, or simple calculation on his part, he faded like a bad dream. Mom, however, was another story. I occasionally caught glimpses of her around town, at the grocery store, sitting alone at a diner. She never approached me, just watched from a distance, her face a twisted mixture of resentment and sadness. Dad told me she called him once more, left a voicemail. "I miss you," she said, voice breaking. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen." He never called her back. Some betrayals left scars too deep for apology. I focused on work, picking up extra hours, saving every penny. For the first time, my future didn't feel chained to someone else's choices. Yet late at night, in the small hours when sleep wouldn't come, I sometimes thought about the woman who had raised me, who had kissed my forehead, cheered at my school plays, wrapped me in warm blankets during winter storms. And I wondered when she had stopped seeing me as her daughter and started seeing me as something else, an enemy, a threat, a burden. One night, Dad and I sat on the front step of his apartment, sipping bad coffee and listening to the distant hum of traffic. "You know," he said, staring into the darkness, "maybe losing everything was the best thing that ever happened to us." I looked at him, surprised. He smiled. A real smile, small but genuine. "We're free now," he said. And for the first time in a long time, I realized he was right. Freedom didn't look like I thought it would. It looked like a battered bookshelf, a half-furnished apartment, a second-hand coffee mug. It looked like hope. Spring arrived slowly that year, dragging itself across the battered landscape of our lives. I found a tiny rental, barely bigger than a studio, and signed the lease with trembling hands. It wasn't much, but it was mine. No one else's name was on the mailbox. No one else could throw me out. Dad helped me move in, carrying boxes with a quiet pride that made my chest ache. We built new routines. Sunday breakfast at the local diner, Wednesday movie nights with cheap popcorn, long walks through the city park where the trees were just starting to bloom. The emptiness didn't disappear overnight. Some mornings, I still woke up reaching for my phone, half expecting another crisis to manage, another fire to put out. But the crises didn't come. Instead, life, plain, ordinary life, slowly took root again. Dad started working part-time at a hardware store, the same one he used to shop at years ago. It wasn't glamorous, but he liked it. He said it made him feel useful again. I poured my energy into my job, and when a small promotion opened up, I applied without hesitation. When I got it, Dad was the first person I called. He laughed, cried, and then drove straight over with a bottle of cheap sparkling cider to celebrate. It wasn't just about the title or the raise. It was about proving to myself that I could stand on my own, without guilt chaining me to the past. Still, shadows sometimes crept in when I least expected. One afternoon, at the grocery store, I caught sight of Linda again. She stood in front of the dairy section, staring blankly at a row of milk cartons. Our eyes met. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to just the two of us. There was no shouting, no drama, just a profound, aching silence. She looked older, smaller, like a woman hollowed out by her own choices. I expected to feel anger, triumph, something sharp and satisfying. Instead, I felt only sadness. I turned and walked away without a word. That evening, I told Dad what happened. He nodded, his expression unreadable. "Some debts," he said quietly, "aren't worth collecting." I knew he was right. We weren't victims anymore. We weren't villains either. We were just two people who had survived the wreckage and were trying, every day, to build something better. Slowly, we started talking about the future, things we had never dared to dream before. Dad talked about taking a road trip out west, something he had always wanted but never done. I thought about going back to school part-time, finishing the degree I had abandoned years ago. Hope was a fragile thing, but it was growing. And this time, it belonged to us. 6 months later, I stood in the sun-drenched parking lot of the local community college, staring up at the brick building with the bold white letters, Admissions Office. I clutched the manila envelope tighter, my application packet, transcripts, a letter explaining my long, winding journey back to this moment. Dad had driven me here, insisting on it, even though I was perfectly capable of handling it myself. He sat in the truck now, pretending to read the newspaper, but glancing up every few seconds to watch me. I smiled, feeling a surge of something fierce and beautiful swell in my chest. Not anger, not fear, not regret. Pride. I walked inside and handed the envelope over to the woman at the front desk. She gave me a polite nod and a cheerful, "Good luck." And just like that, a door I thought was closed forever cracked open again. Later, Dad and I celebrated at our usual diner. The waitress, a cheerful woman named Carla, brought us an extra slice of pie on the house. As we ate, Dad set down his fork and looked at me seriously. "You know," he said, "you could have walked away from me too, after everything." I shook my head. "We walked away from the wrong people, not each other." He smiled then, a real smile that reached all the broken places and glued them back together a little stronger. Outside the diner, the sun was setting in a spectacular blaze of gold and pink, painting everything in warm, forgiving light. Dad and I leaned against his truck, watching the sky change. "Funny," he said after a while, "how you can lose everything you thought mattered and still end up richer." I nodded, feeling the truth of it settle deep in my bones. We lost the house. We lost family we thought would always be there. We lost illusions we didn't even know we were clinging to. But we found freedom. We found honesty. We found each other again. It was more than enough. A few weeks later, I received an official letter in the mail. Acceptance into the program I had dreamed about for years. Dad framed the letter like it was a diploma, hanging it proudly above his modest kitchen table. And slowly, the scars of the past began to fade. Not disappear, they never would, but soften into something less painful. A reminder, not a wound. Sometimes, I would pass the old neighborhood on my way to work. I never turned down the street where the house stood. I didn't need to. My home was no longer a place tied to betrayal and broken promises. It was wherever I chose to build it, brick by brick, memory by memory dot. And as for my mother, she remained a ghost in the background. A cautionary tale, a scar, not a chain. I had given her everything I could. I had paid her debts, endured her anger, mourned the relationship I wished we had. And when it was clear that nothing would ever be enough, I had given her the only thing left, my absence. Freedom wasn't flashy. It wasn't easy. It was a quiet, stubborn choice, made every day in small acts of courage and kindness, in letting go of bitterness, in building something better even when the ground still felt shaky beneath my feet. It was mine. And that made all the difference.